X-23's origin is found in the pages of Marvel Comics 2005 series X-23 Innocence Lost, numbers 1 through 6. And it starts off by showing us a doctor by the name of Dale Rice. And he's frantically tearing apart this office, taking biological samples, lab reports, and other documents and shoving them into this briefcase. And all the while, the sounds of screaming and gunfire echoing in the background. And once he's done gathering up all that important data, he manages to escape the facility. But unfortunately, he does not escape what has caused all that mayhem and chaos inside. And that's when we see the appearance of 3 familiar blades stabbing him through his torso. And once he falls to the ground dead, a mindless Wolverine stands over the doctor's body. Now this scene takes place when Wolverine is escaping the Weapon X program, the same program that bonded adamantium to his bone structure to turn him into an unstoppable weapon. And then after an undetermined amount of time has passed, we see a helicopter land at that site, and out emerges a Professor X lookalike with a goatee who goes by the name Dr. Martin Sutter. And he collects the briefcase that Dr. Rice was trying to escape with. And it seems like these guys were pretty close, because Dr. Sutter offers his apologies and says that this should have never happened. And then he swears to him that he'll keep his promise. So along with the briefcase, he also grabs the doctor's dog tags. And you can see the little slice taken out of it. This is from when Wolverine stabbed the doctor through the chest. And then we see him offering these dog tags to a little boy who's the son of Dr. Rice. And immediately we see by the boy's face that he understands what's happened. And Dr. Sutter sincerely feels this boy's pain and gives the boy a hug in order to console him. Now that little boy, whose name is Xander, ends up growing up to be just like his father and becomes a leading member of this Weapon X program under the direction of Dr. Sutter. And here we see him doing some sort of surgery in the operating room on this beast of a specimen. And regardless of what he tries to do, it seems like this thing is just not going to survive and ends up flatlining. And now a frustrated Xander barges his way into Dr. Sutter's office. And it seems like he's broken up a meeting. So Dr. Sutter takes his time to introduce Xander to Dr. Sarah Kinney, who happens to be the leading authority on mutant genetics, and he's impressed by her work that she's done on mapping the mutant genome. So he's brought her on board to take this project into a new direction. And just to be clear, this project is the Weapon X program. And so what they're trying to do is take the samples that they've gotten from Wolverine and create similar types of beings that can be used as weapons. Now Dr. Kinney has an idea that she can use her expertise to take that original DNA and create a viable clone embryo. Now we can see that Xander is not happy with this new member on the team, but since Dr. Sutter is running the show, he has no say in the matter. Now, even though we just saw him as a little boy crying his eyes out because his father died, and over the years that sadness and pain has turned into hate and arrogance. Because Xander, as a grown-up, he's a total jerk. Because as we move forward, we're going to see him do horrible things to X-23. Not only that, but he's also having an affair with his boss's wife. The same guy who was a good friend to his father, as well as someone who helped raise him. Now Dr. Sutter's wife is the woman that we saw at the reception desk as Xander was making his way to his office. At this point, Dr. Sutter is showing Sarah around, and they're talking about the morality of the things that they do here, because they're not making renewable energy and trying to save the world. They're building weapons, and the things that they do to these specimens is torturous and horrific. And then he asks if she has a problem working with Xander, because he can already see the tension between the two. And she makes it clear that it's not going to be a problem because she's handled worse in her life. And she's telling the truth because she came from a messed up home where her father physically and mentally abused her, which robbed her of her innocence. So now she views the world through the eyes of a cold, calculated scientist, which, sad to say, is the reason why she's so good at what she does. So as time passes, even with her on the team, it seems like every experiment is failing and they're not able to create a viable embryo. And the reason why is because the biological samples that they have are from Wolverine, and he's a male. And so when they're trying to duplicate it, the Y chromosome breaks down somewhere in the process. So she comes up with the idea that what if we eliminate that Y chromosome? And that creation wouldn't necessarily be a clone, but rather more like a twin. And since she believes this is likely to be a success, this is something that they can create now and not potentially have to wait years and years to create an identical male clone. And so both Dr. Sutter and Xander, they scoff at the idea. And the boss clarifies, you were brought in here to work a miracle, so get with the program. Don't change the program. So Sarah doesn't argue the point further. What she does is show her defiance in another way. And while during the day she works on the programs that she's supposed to, at night she's on a solo mission to create this female embryo, which eventually and inevitably became a success. Now she brings it up to her boss, who is not happy that she went behind the back of the program to run these experiments. But she argues the fact. What do you want? Do you want a viable specimen now, or potentially wait years before we get a viable male specimen? And begrudgingly, Dr. Sutter agrees and tells her to proceed with this experiment. And later that night, Xander, being the creep that he is, walks into her bedroom while she's sleeping, wakes her up, and tells her we have a problem, that we can't get a host to carry the embryo, and implies that if she doesn't step up to do it, then all of her hard work goes out the window. And since she came from a messed up childhood, being a mother and having children aren't in her vocabulary. She doesn't have the desire to have family-type connections with anybody, except maybe her sister, who we'll see later in the story. But right now, even though her heart is telling her not to do this, her mind is focused on her work. So she makes the decision to carry this child on her own. And that's another thing. Initially, she doesn't see this as a child or even her child, she tells herself that this is a weapon because that's what they're going to use it for. But as the process moves forward, we see those maternal instincts start to blossom because even though her every move is being watched, we see her sneaking in small tokens of love for this baby. Like for instance, on the outside, it looks like she's reading The Art of War to her unborn child. But really, hidden in this book's pages is the story of Pinocchio. And when she finally goes into labor, they take the baby away from her immediately. And we can see in her weakened state that she's trying to protest. But again, to these scientists and doctors, they just see this baby as a potential weapon. And we can see the evil smile on Xander's face as two small claws start to protrude out of the baby's knuckles. Now fast forward 7 years, we see a young Laura sitting in a white room with no furniture or personal belongings of any kind. And like with everything that they do to her, it's pretty much to break her down so that she doesn't feel any emotion or personal attachment to anything. This is so that she will understand her sole purpose, and that's to follow orders and to complete her missions. And now we're introduced to X-23's martial arts instructor. And from the beginning of her training, he's strict with her, but at the same time, sees her not as a weapon, but as his student. And the powers that be don't like this because they don't want anyone humanizing X-23. But as their training progresses and she excels in hand-to-hand combat, her sensei continues to cultivate this student-teacher relationship. Now, it's not by any extraordinary means. He's not treating her like his daughter or anything. He just gives her compliments when she performs correctly, and when she messes up a technique, he tells her things that both corrects her, but at the same time builds her back up. But regardless, Xander does not like this, and he continuously scolds the old man for treating her as anything else but an object. Next, we see Xander, Dr. Sutter, and Sarah sitting down having a meeting together, and they're discussing exactly how they're going to go about the process of lacing her skeleton with adamantium. And while Xander's pushing to do it now, Sarah makes it clear that her mutant gene won't kick in till sometime around puberty, and if you attempt this operation now, there's a good chance that it'll kill her. And Xander accuses her of just being an overprotective mother, but Dr. Sutter intercedes and says, you know what? She's useful to nobody if she dies, so we're going to hold off on the operation and continue to further her training while at the same time introduce new ways to hopefully speed up the awakening of her mutant abilities. Now satisfied with this, Sarah walks out of the meeting, and Dr. Sutter and Xander take this time to have a quick one-on-one, and he asks Xander, how's the trigger scent coming along? And this sadist responds by saying, better than expected. There's a couple other things happening along the storyline outside of X-23's progression. The first is with Sarah. As one of her only friends inside this facility, a guy named Kevin, he delivers her a message. He gives her the phone saying that she has an important call, and the person on this other line is her sister Debbie. At some point, Sarah told everybody all the things that her father was doing to her, but apparently Debbie didn't believe her. And so to this day, Sarah refuses to talk to her sister, but Debbie is very apologetic and says that she should have believed her. And the reason why she's calling is because her daughter, Sarah's niece, wants to get to know her and have a relationship with her. And since their father has died, and maybe they can rekindle their sisterly relationship. But Sarah cuts her off at the knees and tells her, don't contact me again. If your child wants to send me something, that's fine. And on the flip side of that, you have Xander and Dr. Sutter's wife, who've been having an affair this entire time. And she just dropped some news on him because she's pregnant and it's his. And she's asking him, what are we going to do? And he just blankly looks at her and just says, tell him it's his. And then he walks away. So I'm sure none of you like this guy, but what happens next is going to make you hate him because apparently their patience has reached the limit and they've come up with a risky way to possibly speed up X-23's mutant abilities, and that's to shove her into a chamber and blast her with radiation. And when Sarah hears about this, she comes running, but she's too late. They've already started the process. And as they're poisoning X-23 with radiation, she's screaming her lungs out. But fortunately, the process was successful. And not only did her healing factor kick in, but so did her claws. Now she has 6 claws just like Wolverine, however these are a little bit different. She has 2 on each hand and 1 on each foot. Now I've heard different reasons as to why her claws come out this way and not all 6 in her hands. In the movie Logan, they mentioned something about female animals in the wild tend to use their back legs more often than males do when it comes to offensive and defensive fighting. Another reason I've heard is that her bone structure is smaller than Wolverine's, so for some reason her hands weren't able to hold all 3 claws, so her body decided to eject the 3rd claw out of each foot. Those explanations don't really matter to me. I'm satisfied by the look that it gives her because I think it looks really cool, especially since she has a much slender frame than Wolverine. She can pull off acrobatic moves and do things with her legs that Wolverine may not be able to do naturally. So back in the story, Sarah runs back to Dr. Sutter's office and she's livid, but her boss flips it back on her and he has full confidence that Xander's doing exactly what he needs to be to complete their objective. And we see that they waste no time to get X-23 into the operating room to start the adamantium bonding process. Now they're not going to do it to her entire skeleton, they're only going to do it to her blades. So the process includes cutting off each one of these blades, which are actually her bones, lacing them with adamantium, and then surgically reattaching them back to her bone structure. And as Xander and the other doctors are about to start this process, he tells them not to use anesthetic. And everyone in the room is like, what, are you joking? That's crazy. And then he screams for all of them to get out. And just before he starts to do the surgery, he leans over to her and whispers, "This is for my father." So we see now the adamantium has bonded successfully to her claws. Now, although she's recovered physically, but mentally and emotionally is a completely different story. Now, with her weaponization almost complete, Xander and Dr. Sutter decide to try out this trigger synth they've created to see if it produces the desired effects. But how they conduct this next experiment is insane. So to further mentally and emotionally abuse X-23, they put the trigger scent on one of the swords that her martial arts instructor uses in their training. So in their next training session, the moment he unsheathes the katana, she blacks out and goes into rage mode. And this has completely taken her instructor by surprise. But unfortunately, her in this state will be the last thing he ever sees. And when X-23 snaps out of berserker mode, she can't believe what she's done. Now, 3 years later, she's still living in this room with no personal items, and we can tell by the fetal position she's sitting in that the trauma and torture has not stopped. At this time, she's about 10 years old, and Xander and Dr. Sutter have come to the conclusion that she's ready to take on her first real mission. So she's given a packet of information, as well as a timer that's set for 22 minutes, because that's the amount of time they're giving her to complete her mission. And this isn't just some nobody. This is a presidential candidate she has to take out, someone who's currently in front of a large crowd of people, as well as protected by Secret Service. So the time that she has to strike is while he's speaking at this rally, and she's come up with a clever way to get through the metal detectors. So she disguises herself as a child who has disabilities and puts on leg braces, so she's able to get past the metal detectors as well as gain sympathy from the Secret Service agents, who right off the bat dismisses her as being any kind of threat. And then she walks up to one of the agents and she says meekly if she can meet Mr. Johnson, who's the presidential candidate. And the agent who she's talking to is telling her, "No, I'm sorry, sweetie, we can't do that. We can't just let you walk up and talk to him." And then she turns up her acting level and starts bawling her eyes out. So much so that it's drawing all sorts of attention. So the agent is going to allow X-23 to go into the back rooms where Mr. Johnson and his family, as well as a handful of staff, are doing photo ops. And so as he and his family are gathered together and they bring X-23 with them, putting on their best smiles for this picture to be taken, as the photographer snaps the photo, X-23 jumps into attack mode and stabs Mr. Johnson in the chest with one of her foot claws. Now the next thing she needs to do is get rid of all the witnesses. And there's like 20-something people in this room. And she eliminates all of them before making her escape. Now back at the facility, Drs. Sutter and Xander, they're doing a conference call with all sorts of people. And the people that they're having a meeting with are pretty much all villains, because this whole program isn't some sort of patriotic endeavor to create super soldiers for the benefit of God and country. This whole program is designed to become a weapon-making factory. Weapons that they want to sell to the highest bidder. And after their meeting, Xander comes barging into the reception area telling Rachel, aka Dr. Sutter's wife, to create an account for Wilson Fisk. And just after he says this, he notices that Sarah is in the room as well. And she's angry at the fact that they're treating X-23 this way. And he's pretty much brushing her off. He's telling her that you don't have a part to play anymore. You've done your job. Now let us do ours. And as Sarah storms off, Rachel is asking Xander if they can talk about Henry, who's 2 years old now. And this is actually Xander's kid, who they're just saying really belongs to Dr. Sutter. And being the dad of the year like he is, Xander just says he doesn't have time for this and walks away. So after Sarah left the reception area, she goes to see X-23. And as she tries to maintain some sort of sliver of humanity in her daughter, she feels that these evil men have completely corrupted her, because their short encounter is broken up by the fact that X-23 is being sent on another mission. And by the look on her face, it looks like she's happy to hear this. And during this period, they send X-23 out on mission after mission after mission, and she's completing these assassinations flawlessly and within the time parameters that they've set for her. Now on a particular mission, Xander decides to tag along, and like every other mission, X-23 assassinates her target within the time limits, but just as she's making it to the extraction point, Xander kills the support team that's waiting inside the helicopter and puts a gun to the helicopter's pilot and tells him to take off. And as the chopper is leaving, he looks down and he sees X-23 looking back up at her, and he throws her his father's old dog tags as another gesture of showing his contempt towards her, because they've cracked the code. They can create more genetic clones of X-23 and sell them to the highest bidder. That was the whole point of this program. And he's not just taking off, leaving her there to fend for herself, because this place is full of soldiers who are armed to the teeth, and I'm sure they're not happy that she just killed their boss. So this is supposed to be a death sentence for X-23. Now back at the facility, when a little time has passed, the alarms are blaring because there's some sort of security breach. And when the doors open up, we see a battle-damaged X-23 making her way inside. And Dr. Sutter is wondering what is going on, because Xander told everybody that she died on mission. So he instructs Sarah to take X-23 and debrief her to find out exactly what's going on, which I'm sure has Xander now sweating bullets. But he doesn't have to, because X-23 isn't saying anything. As much as Sarah is trying to goad a story out of her, as readers we can see by the panels exactly what happened. But for whatever reason, X-23 has decided to keep her mouth shut. Now shortly after this, Sarah gets a call from her sister, who's in hysterics, because apparently her daughter, Sarah's niece Megan, has been kidnapped. And in that moment, Sarah sees the only way to help her niece. And it's actually going to make her a hypocrite, because while she was trying to protect X-23's childhood innocence as much as she could, she's decided to use her to get her niece back and to possibly kill whoever's responsible. Now, as Sarah sneaks X-23 out of the facility and makes their way to Sarah's sister's house in San Francisco. Now, she can't tell her sister Debbie anything really. So she gives her this story that she's working with a local detective to help find her daughter. But what's really going on is X-23 sneaking into Megan's room to get her scent, as well as the scent of the person who took her. And when she has it, she's on the move. Now, Sarah's friend Kevin from the Weapon X program has joined her along in this. Now, he's kind of been her companion all throughout, and they're following X-23, seeing exactly where she goes. Now, I'm not too sure how they figured it out, but X-23 determined that the person who took Megan was some sort of pedophile. And so she shows up at his door dressed up like a Girl Scout, pretending to sell him some cookies. And this disgusting human being invites her into his apartment under the false pretense that he just has to go look for his wallet. But in reality, he's going to get a knife. And when he comes back, X-23 is holding up a box of cookies, asking if he'd like to sample some. And as she opens up the box, instead of there being cookies, there's actually a picture of Megan's face, which takes this sicko by surprise and allows X-23 to give him what he deserves. And after safely escorting Megan to the car where Sarah and Kevin are waiting, Sarah tells Megan that she's her aunt and she's going to take her home and she has nothing to worry about, that all this was just a bad dream. Now, when she brings X-23 back to the facility, Xander and Dr. Sutter are flipping out on her, that this billion-dollar experiment isn't something that she can just take out on a field trip. And then she throws back in Xander's face, "What do you care? You left her to die." And as always, Dr. Sutter ends up breaking up the argument. Now, he tells Sarah that he's not happy at what she did and that her future here isn't looking good. So Xander decides to take Dr. Sutter home. And the doctor is venting towards him, saying that he could tell his wife Rachel that something's going on. He's not too sure what it is. And then Xander reassures him, "You're overworked and you're overburdened. How about this? Take some time off. I can run the program. I know the ins and outs of the facility. Just sign this document saying that you'll temporarily give me control over the entire project. Meanwhile, rest up, take care of things at home, and when you're ready, you can step back in and run things. I've already lost one father to the program. I don't want to lose another." And so that totally pulls on Dr. Sutter's heartstrings. And he signs over control to Xander, gives him a hug, and even calls him son. And as Xander's driving away, he ends up pulling over on the side of the road, not too far from Dr. Sutter's house. Opens up the trunk, and guess who's sitting there? X-23. And he throws her a picture of Dr. Sutter, Rachel, and Henry, who's actually Xander's kid, and tells X-23 that you have 22 minutes and make sure you make it look like an accident. So yeah, the only way to make this guy look more evil is if you had him run over a puppy on the way back to the facility. So while inside Dr. Sutter's home, Rachel and the doctor, they're having this epic argument, and she's telling him everything. She's been having a long-term affair with Xander, which resulted in her being pregnant with Henry, and Henry's not really his son, and Xander said he would kill me if I ever told you, and Dr. Sutter's not believing a word. And that's when X-23 pops out of nowhere. Now, instead of using her claws, she actually has a tonfa, or a baton, and she begins beating Dr. Sutter to death with it, before turning her attention to Rachel and delivering her the same fate. Now, the reason why she didn't use her claws is because this is supposed to look like an accident. More specifically, a fire. Now, I'm assuming that once the whole house is set ablaze and the bodies have all been burnt up, they're not going to be able to tell that they were assassinated. And this will look more like some sort of household fire that got out of control. But now she turns her attention to the child. As she makes her way upstairs, she opens the door to the closet where Henry is hiding in. And he looks up at her, clutching his Spider-Man doll with fear in his eyes. And as she looks down at him with complete indifference, then she extracts one of her claws and seems to do the unthinkable. Now, once the house is set on fire, she makes her way back to the facility where she's hosed down and debriefed. Well, more like threatened rather than debriefed, because Xander screams at her to never tell anyone what happened. So that same night, Sarah goes to visit X-23, but then Kevin busts in and he tells Sarah that Dr. Sutter and his wife have been found dead, that their whole house has been burnt to the ground. And then she asks about Henry. Now that's when we're given some good news, because Henry's been found alive, hidden somewhere in the woods behind their house. And then he tells her that he's going to go with the team that's going to cleanse the site and suggests that she go with them. And she agrees and tells him that she'll be right there. But just before she walks out, X-23 opens her mouth and reveals a crumpled up piece of paper that she's been hiding. And as Sarah takes it from her and uncrumples it, she sees that it's a picture of Dr. Sutter and his whole family. And then she puts two and two together that Xander sent X-23 on a mission to assassinate his family. And then she makes up her mind. They've used you as a weapon, and even I've used you as a weapon. We're both monsters. And then X-23 cocks her head and looks at her with a questioned look on her face, asking, "A mission?" And Sarah says with tears in her eyes, a mission. Then Sarah goes to see Xander, and she finds him sitting back in Dr. Sutter's chair with his feet on the table. Now she puts on a face to hide her true intentions, and she tells him that she's sorry for your loss. I know that you and Dr. Sutter were very close. And he says, yeah, it's a tragedy, but life goes on. Now come on, Sarah, walk with me. And he pretty much tells her that she's no longer needed there, that he thought her role as somewhat of a parental figure for X-23 was a bad idea. Now with Dr. Sutter out of the way, he's not going to make that same mistake with X-24 through 50. And he shows her the room filled with all of these embryos being brought to term in these birthing pods. And then he tells Sarah that the two of them aren't so different, all the while stroking the side of her face. And then she slaps his hand away and he just laughs it off and tells her that you can go see your pet one more time and then pack your bags because I want you gone tonight. And if you're still here by morning, I'll have you shot. And back in her room, we see Sarah jotting down some notes. Now, this is actually more of a diary because all throughout this series, we see various text boxes of somebody's inner monologue. And this is actually what Sarah's been writing the whole time. This is a letter that she has planned on giving to X-23 when they escape the facility. And then Kevin comes into Sarah's room telling her, if we're going to do this, we got to hurry. And now we see two armed guards just talking about the things that have been going on there lately with the deaths of Dr. Sutter and his family. And out of nowhere, one of them gets shot in the head. And before the other one calls for help, he meets the same end. And we see that the gunman is Kevin because him and Sarah are on the way to bust out X-23. But this isn't an escort mission. What Sarah does is uses X-23 programming to their benefit. And she slides under the door a packet of information that X-23 usually gets with her mission objective. And the mission objective she's given in this particular packet is to kill Xander Rice. And she has 22 minutes to escape the facility. So by this time, Sarah and Kevin are out of stealth mode and they're just pretty much shooting their way out. Unfortunately, Kevin doesn't make it, so Sarah has to go on without him. And her last stop before exiting the facility is the security room, where she kills the guard that's there and rips out all the wires to their surveillance system, buying X-23 some time to complete her objectives and finish this mission. And one of them is to destroy the embryos. So she places bombs in this birthing room, and as she's finishing, she's confronted by a team of armed guards. But fortunately for her, this is business as usual and takes them down without a problem. Now Sarah has made it out of the facility, and X-23 has a little more than 10 minutes to get out. But the last thing she needs to do before she escapes is to end Xander. And so she makes it into his room, and for some reason he thinks that this little pistol that he has is gonna stop her. Now he does manage to hit her with a few rounds, but ultimately she disables the gun along with one of his fingers. Now this is the cool part. Now instead of stabbing him or slicing him, she retracts her claws and uses the remaining time that she has on her watch to brutally beat him down with her unarmed martial arts training. And to me, what I got from this is kind of like a revenge killing on behalf of her sensei that they made her kill earlier in the story. Now after she gives him a good kick to the ribs for good measure, he's still alive, he's still conscious, but she takes Xander's father's dog tags that he gave her when he left her for dead, and she drops it on him and calls him an animal and walks out of the building with 30 seconds to spare before the entire thing explodes and goes up in flames. And upon seeing X-23, Sarah is relieved. Now they can leave this nightmare behind. She might even be able to rekindle her relationship with her sister, that things will be better from here on out. But then she smells it, the trigger scent, and X-23's eyes turn red as she enters into berserk mode, and unable to hold herself back, she lunges at Sarah, and in that moment, Sarah realized how this happened. When Xander stroked her cheek, he was placing the scent on her, and regardless if he knew nothing about the escape plan, he had told her to go and see X-23 before she left, knowing that she would have killed her. And the fact that she slipped the mission details under the door, how they usually do, that's what prevented X-23 from switching into berserk mode, because she couldn't detect it through the door. But all that doesn't matter because X-23 brutally kills her mother. And when she comes back to her senses, she realizes what she's done. And with her dying breath, Sarah is telling her, your name is Laura, not X-23. You're my daughter, and I love you. And Laura's heart's breaking, and she knows that she can't take any of this back. The only thing that she can do is spend these final moments with her mother. And she lays by her side and just says over and over, don't leave me. And scattered all around them in the snow is the letter that Sarah was writing to Laura, as well as the pages that she was reading her from the book of Pinocchio. And we can even see a picture of Wolverine with Professor X. Now I'm assuming the original plan was to get Laura over to the Xavier Institute and have them help and protect her in any way that they could. But obviously that didn't happen. And what's even worse is that whatever recovery team is sent to search through the wreckage, they found the trigger scent, which means that somebody still has control over X-23 and can use her to do horrible things without her knowing it. And the story ends with this page showing Laura 2 years later after escaping the facility. And we can see by the evidence of the clothes that she's wearing that it must have been an interesting 2 years, as she's donning a jacket with the X-Men logo as well as an interesting medallion around her neck. Now how and where she got them, that story we're going to save for another time. I just want to thank everybody out there who's been listening to these videos. I appreciate your support, the comments and the likes. I'll continue to do my part to put out the best content possible. And if this is your first time watching one of my videos, here's a couple more I'll throw up on the screen that I I think you'll enjoy. Now, always remember to support your local comic and game shops. I thank you guys so much for listening, and I will see you next time.